The maternity ward was unusually quiet that morning, wrapped in the soft beeping of monitors and the distant shuffle of nurses' shoes along polished floors. Pale winter light filtered through the tall windows, falling gently on the narrow bed where the young woman lay. She looked exhausted but peaceful, one hand resting protectively on the blanket, the other still bearing the faint marks of an IV. Childbirth had drained her of strength, yet there was a quiet resilience in her eyes, the kind born from enduring pain that changes a person forever. The door burst open without warning, breaking the fragile calm. Her mother-in-law entered like a storm, her heels striking the floor sharply, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She did not offer congratulations. She did not glance at the sleeping newborn in the transparent crib nearby. Instead, her gaze locked onto the woman in the bed with cold precision, as if she were an intruder rather than the mother of her grandchild. "So, you're still here," the older woman said, her voice sharp and controlled. "I thought you'd have the decency to leave by now." The young woman blinked, unsure if exhaustion had made her mishear. "Leave?" she asked quietly. "I just gave birth." "That doesn't change anything," the mother-in-law snapped. "My son made a mistake, and we're fixing it. You've embarrassed our family enough. Once you're discharged, you're not coming back to our house." Each word landed like a blow. The young woman felt her throat tighten, but she refused to cry. She had cried enough during the long nights of pregnancy, enough during labor when fear and pain had blurred together. She would not give this woman the satisfaction now. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not my problem," came the cold reply. "You should have thought about that before trapping my son with a baby." At that moment, the newborn stirred, letting out a small, fragile cry. The sound filled the room, raw and innocent. For a brief second, the mother-in-law hesitated, but her expression hardened again. "Don't expect sympathy," she continued. "You're on your own." Before the young woman could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Calm, steady, deliberate. The door opened again, but this time, no storm followed. A tall man stepped inside, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes took in the scene in an instant, the pale woman in the bed, the crying baby, and the rigid figure of the older woman standing like a judge delivering a sentence. "What's going on here?" he asked. The mother-in-law froze. Her face drained of color. I didn't expect you," she stammered. The man was her husband's father, a figure she had always spoken about with forced respect and barely concealed fear. He rarely involved himself in family matters, but when he did, his words carried weight no one dared to ignore. "I asked a simple question," he said calmly, though there was steel beneath his tone. "She's being dramatic," the mother-in-law replied quickly. "I was just telling her how things will be." The man walked closer to the bed and gently looked at the young woman. "Is that true?" Tears finally welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "She told me to leave. That I'm not welcome." Silence fell, thick and heavy. The man straightened slowly and turned to his wife. His gaze was steady, unblinking. "You came to a maternity ward," he said, "to throw out a woman who just gave birth to your grandchild. She's not suitable for our family," the mother-in-law shot back, her voice trembling now. "She's ruined everything." "No," he replied firmly. "What ruins a family is cruelty." The mother-in-law opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed unsure, her authority cracking like thin ice. "She is the mother of this child," the man continued. "And as long as I am alive, she will not be treated like trash." He turned back to the young woman. "You are not leaving. Not today. Not like this." The mother-in-law stood frozen, utterly speechless. The power she believed she held slipped away in seconds. The room felt different now, safer, warmer. Later that day, as the young woman rested, news began to spread far beyond the hospital walls. On television screens across the country, viewers watched a completely different kind of confrontation unfold. Kelly Clarkson, beloved singer and host, was sitting on the set of Today with Jenna and Friends when the conversation suddenly turned tense. What began as light banter shifted into pointed remarks, and the atmosphere changed instantly. Kelly's smile faded as she tried to steer the discussion back to neutral ground, but the tension only grew. Voices overlapped, opinions clashed, and the studio audience grew uneasy. Finally, Kelly took a breath, stood up, and calmly said she would not continue a conversation rooted in disrespect. She walked off the set, leaving stunned silence behind her. For many watching, the moment felt jarring, even shocking. But for others, it was powerful. It was a reminder that boundaries matter, that walking away can be an act of strength rather than weakness. Social media exploded with debate, praise, and criticism, but one thing was clear: silence in the face of disrespect was no longer the only option. Back in the hospital room, the young woman watched the news quietly on a small television mounted on the wall. She cradled her baby, feeling a strange sense of connection to what she was seeing. Different worlds, different stories, yet the same truth echoed through both. No one had the right to humiliate or discard another human being. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know where she would live or how she would manage on her own. But as she held her child and remembered the moment her father-in-law had stood up for her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And sometimes, hope is enough to begin again. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable, mixing with the softer scent of baby powder that drifted from the crib beside the bed. The young woman lay still, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache, her mind floating somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. Just hours ago, she had brought a new life into the world. The pain had been overwhelming, but the moment she heard her baby cry, everything else had faded. Or so she thought. The door opened abruptly, not with the gentle knock of a nurse, but with the force of someone who believed they had every right to enter. Her mother-in-law stepped inside, perfectly dressed, hair immaculately styled, eyes cold and assessing. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how the birth had gone. Her gaze skimmed over the newborn as if it were an inconvenient detail rather than a miracle. "So," the older woman said flatly, folding her arms, "I see you're awake." The young woman swallowed and nodded. "Yes. I won't waste time," her mother-in-law continued. "As soon as you're discharged, you need to leave. You won't be coming back to our home." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They hovered in the air, hollow and unreal. "Leave," the young woman repeated quietly. "Why?" "You know why," came the sharp reply. "You were never right for my son. This whole situation was a mistake." The young woman's heart pounded. She looked instinctively toward the crib, where her baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing inches away. "This is your grandchild," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "That doesn't change the facts," the mother-in-law snapped. "You've brought nothing but shame. We'll support the child, but you're on your own." Tears burned behind the young woman's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that tears only fueled this woman's contempt. "I don't have family nearby," she said softly. "I don't have anywhere to go." "You should have thought of that earlier," the older woman replied without hesitation. "You're not my responsibility." The baby stirred, letting out a tiny whimper. The sound pierced the tension like a needle. The young woman reached out weakly, resting her hand on the crib, trying to soothe her child. The mother-in-law turned away, unmoved. "You have until discharge," she said, already heading for the door. "After that, don't contact us." Before she could leave, another voice filled the room. Calm, firm, unexpected. "That won't be happening." The mother-in-law stopped dead. Slowly, she turned around. Standing in the doorway was her husband, a man rarely seen but always felt. His presence alone seemed to shrink the room, drawing all attention toward him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her confidence faltering. "I came to see my grandchild," he replied, stepping inside. His eyes moved from the older woman to the young mother in the bed, lingering there with concern. "And it seems I arrived just in time." "She's lying," the mother-in-law said quickly. "I was just being honest." "Honest?" he echoed. "By throwing her out of a maternity ward." Silence followed. The mother-in-law opened her mouth, but no words came. Her authority, so absolute moments earlier, suddenly crumbled. "You don't get to decide this," he continued, his voice steady but unyielding. "Not today. Not ever. She's ruined our family," his wife whispered, desperation creeping into her tone. "No," he said quietly. "Cruelty ruins families. And I won't be part of it." He turned to the young woman. "You and this child are family. You will be treated with respect." The young woman's composure finally broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent but unstoppable. For the first time since she'd given birth, she felt seen. Protected. The mother-in-law stood frozen, her face pale, her mouth slightly open, utterly speechless. That evening, the hospital room felt different. Warmer. Safer. The young woman rested, her baby nestled against her chest, while the television murmured softly in the background. A daytime talk show was on, the hosts laughing, the mood light, until it wasn't. The conversation shifted. Tension crept into the voices on screen. Kelly Clarkson sat among the hosts, her expression changing as the discussion grew sharper, more personal. She tried to redirect, to keep things civil, but the words kept coming, cutting and dismissive. Finally, Kelly stood up. "I'm not doing this," she said calmly. And she walked off the set. The studio fell silent. Viewers at home gasped. Social media would later explode with opinions, but in that moment, it was simply a woman refusing to accept disrespect. The young mother watched, transfixed. She felt something stir inside her, something fragile but powerful. The idea that walking away could be strength. That silence didn't always mean defeat. She turned off the television and looked down at her baby. "Things won't be easy," she whispered. "But I won't let anyone treat us like we don't matter." She didn't know where she would go after discharge. She didn't know how she would rebuild her life. But she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone, and she was no longer powerless. Sometimes, it takes the courage of others, an unexpected guest, a woman walking off a stage, to remind us of our own. And sometimes, that reminder is the beginning of everything.